Before I go any further, please don't ask me the question why at my age I'm doing a PhD. Because as yet I have not quite worked out the answer, except for the fact that I'm loving it to death.
And it's loving you to death.
It's keeping me young, I'm only 82. Thank you very much for the opportunity to talk to you. In fact, I'm over here on vacation in inverted commas, attending the Scott Fest thing over at Estes Park, the weekend after this, hence this name here. I'm very, very Irish, but my parents put a Scottish name out the front, so I've got to cover both worlds, I suppose. What I'd like to do is very briefly tell you a little bit about education in Australia, and then perhaps a little bit about education in New South Wales and teaching science in New South Wales. Then a little bit about myself and how I came into this project and why I think it's an important project, and hopefully I'll convince you likewise, and perhaps share some of my results with you that may get you thinking, because that's, I guess, what good research does, creates a thinking mechanism. So once again, thank you for the opportunity. Yes, I do recognise that your physics education group is world renowned. I mean, it was one of the very first things that I found when I was doing my research about physics education. So let's get into the Australia bit. This lump here, this multicoloured bit is Australia. It's about the same size as the United States, except for Alaska. If you put Alaska in there as well, you probably have to colour in this bit.
We keep trying to get rid of Alaska.
Well, you bought it in the first place. Not for much, I might add.
Yeah.
So, we have, as you can see there, 7 states, not 50. Well, 5 states and 2 territories. Education in Australia is federally funded. In other words, the federal government hands out to each of the states and territories a certain amount of money. And that money is usually on a per capita basis. But interestingly enough, in the last 10 years or so, that per capita basis has been swayed by a differential between private schools and government schools. And when I say private schools, they're also called independent schools, and they include such things as Catholic schools, Muslim schools, independent private schools, which are the supposedly super groovy ones, you know, that you've got to be millionaires before you can enrol your kids in. They're supposed to be funded on need, but unfortunately a lot of the private schools have politicians' kids go to them. And as a consequence, that needs basis has been very grey over the last 10 years, and at the present moment, I might say, is causing quite some discussion in Australia as to whether or not it will continue. So with 7 states and territories, we have 7 different education authorities. Each state is responsible for education in its entirety. But that therefore means that we have hundreds of different syllabi across the nation. And we also have 7 sets of graduation criteria to become teachers or even to leave school. That's a little frightening. But here's some interesting statistics for you. Here's Australia. Education spending as a percentage of the GDP, gross domestic product. We rank about 6th. Sorry, tell fibs. 4.9% of our GDP. Yours is about 5.6%. That 4.9% ranks with, excuse me for referring to my notes, Iran, Moldavia and Tonga. Yours is, as I said, 5.7%. This is in 2007. 5.3% in the UK, 6.7% in New Zealand, and you're probably not going to like this one, 18.7% in Cuba. This year, that 4.9% has dropped to 4.3%. So Australia's spending on education is on the decline. because unfortunately the economists are now saying, what value for money do we get out of it? How can we cut the costs? Here we are, we've put all these millions and billions of dollars into education. How much improvement has there been? And if they can't see quantifiable improvement, they come to the philosophy, righto, well, we'll continue to cut spending until we notice it gets worse. Then we'll know that that's the level at which we should be funding.
I love it.
So, back to the system. State government runs the whole shebang, except the private system. You can have a school that's entirely responsible for its salary structure, its curriculum structure, the whole bit. But we do have an overarching authority. In New South Wales, it's called the Board of Studies. They set the external examinations. For example, at the end of Year 10, we have what's called the school certificate. If you get that school certificate, you can leave school. It's no longer compulsory to attend. Or you can choose to go on to Years 11 and 12 and graduate from there with a higher school certificate. Very creative we are in Australia. But that higher school certificate means that you don't have to go to school ever, ever, ever again. Or if you do really, really well, you can go to university. If you don't do quite so well, or you have a vocational interest, you can go and do technical and further education studies to become electricians, builders, plumbers, tradespeople, hairdressers. That's one of the very popular trades in Australia at the moment. But all of these things mean that it becomes a very complicated system. And I guess, and as I've looked, your curriculum is becoming incredibly packed as well. We have in New South Wales 7 key learning areas. And they are English, mathematics, science, human society and its environment, creative arts, languages, personal development, health and physical education. That's all there. Plus, we also have these other things that the community insists upon. Road safety, driver education, drug education, anti-violence education, anti-bullying education, civics education, religious education, Aboriginal studies, ethics education, and compulsory sport. Doesn't leave much time to learn science. And in fact, if you want to be a science teacher in Australia, all you need to do is get that qualification and you are welcomed. You are sought after. Teachers are rare over there at the moment. That's because my vintage is retiring. Back in the 60s and 70s when I was trained and began to teach, that's the 1960s and 70s, by the way, we got scholarships. And it was very popular. If you received a certain mark in the higher school certificate, they'd pay you to go to university. They'd give you living expenses. And then you went and became a teacher. And it was a career guaranteed for life. Very popular. Gosh, we can save money if we don't give out scholarships and we don't do all of this or that or the other. Now teachers are as rare as rocking horse manure. And more importantly, physics teachers, they're a dying breed. Chemistry teachers, not so bad. Let's think about education in New South Wales specifically. There's Colorado, this white bit here. You can see that it fits about twice into New South Wales. And New South Wales is in fact the biggest single education authority in the world. It has over 1.2 million students, more than 120,000 teachers, employees rather, 65,000 of those are teachers. We turn over more than 6,000 each year. But, interestingly, in the next 5 years, that number is expected to rise to between 8,000 and 9,000. We can't keep up. As I said, my vintage is retiring. 3 major elements, if you wish. K to 6, which is primary, as we call it. You call it elementary, but I notice now that you're going to a middle school structure. where I think you have K to 4 and then 5 to 7 or something, or K to 5, and then 5 to 8, 6 to 8, sorry. But then we have junior secondary, and that's our compulsory years of schooling finished. And then we have 11 and 12, which is our senior secondary. As I mentioned earlier, the school certificate and the higher school certificate are externally set statewide examinations in all of the subjects. Somebody asked me earlier, where is Armidale in relation to Sydney? Well, you can see Sydney's a suburb of Armidale, about 450 miles due south. It is the home of the University of New England. It's at about 3,500 feet, which is slightly lower than here. And the town itself has about 25,000 people. Not a very big town. But when you consider that the university is approximately a third of that population, it makes it fairly important. All right. Who can teach in New South Wales? You do a university degree. That's compulsory. There are many different structures to that university degree. You can do a Bachelor of Teaching, a Bachelor of Education. A Bachelor of Teaching is 4 years full-time study, where content is not so much impressed upon the student. They're the elementary teachers, the teachers that are supposed to teach everything. Or you can do, as I said, the Bachelor of Education, in which case you do 2 years full-time in a specific discipline, science or maths or English or any of the other key learning areas. Then in your final 2 years of a degree, which is also a 4-year degree, you start to do some pedagogy type studies. But you still must have at least one major, and the major only requires a 3rd year of study. Getting people to do that 3rd year of physics study is very, very, very difficult, and I'll come to that in a moment. But when you graduate, you are supposed to be competent in each of those 7 elements. After 30 years of teaching, I am not competent in each of those 7 elements. That is unrealistic. And the Institute of Teachers, which has not so long ago been formed, was formed by the government and filled by elitist teachers. These are wonderful goals to have, but we've got a long way to go before we can get people to realise that they are goals and not requirements. Before you can teach, you have to have a portfolio, and that has to contain evidence, and that evidence can be fairly daunting to acquire. You can be conditionally certificated, then you can become certificated. It sounds like you're going to be admitted to an institution, doesn't it? Well, in fact, you are. The Institute of Teachers. But then you get professional competence. But that's only after about 8 or 10 years. Doesn't that sound stupid to you? You get to be competent, eventually. But the next step's really, really good. Then you have professional excellence, and after that you have professional leadership. So our system is becoming very, very structured in its stricture, if you like. That little box there, I don't know how to get rid of it. So behind there it says you have 7 key learning areas, the same in our K to 6. 7 to 10 are the specialist teachers. A physics teacher, biology teacher, chemistry teacher, or any teacher can teach 7 to 10 science. In fact, English teachers, maths teachers, PE teachers teach 7 to 10 science, and that's a bit of a worry. Year 11 and 12, you do have the specialist ones. In years 11 and 12, you do a total of 12 units per year, and each of the subjects that you elect to do is a 2-unit subject. So you have 2-unit physics, 2-unit chemistry, 2-unit maths, biology, etc., etc.